Thanks very much, Mihir. And it's really wonderful that you're organizing the Fletcher Ideas Exchange. It's a fantastic forum. I am delighted to be back on home turf here at the Fletcher School. It's always great to be back. And I'm going to be speaking with you tonight about bridging the academic policy activist divide and why that's so critically important for advancing international peace and security. I've spent my professional life in the academy, in the NGO sector, working with activists from tough spots around the world, in the US government, and now in that place in between at the US Institute of Peace, focused on the fundamental question: how does social and political change happen? And how does it happen without spilling a lot of blood? Over the course of this time, I've learned a few things. One of the most important is that the people who are directly affected by injustices that fuel violence, whether it's exclusion, discrimination, corruption, racism, are typically the people who are the most motivated to take action to address those injustices. Those people are found at the grassroots, and their action is grounded in local communities. Second, disruption is good. Sometimes you need to shake up the power structures, disrupt the status quo, in order to be able to level the playing field and get to the point where other nonviolent processes that you as Fletcher students study, negotiations, mediation, have a chance to get to yes. Third, nonviolent movements involving people using nonviolent tactics, vigils, strikes, boycotts, civil disobedience, non-cooperation, are truly a universal phenomenon. They emerge in unlikely places, and they succeed in unlikely places. Let's take a brief tour of the world. Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, a country that's endured 36 years of dictatorship and chronic economic crises. Last May, something unexpected happened. A then unknown pastor made a YouTube video where he called on his countrymen to take action and reclaim the country for its children. The This Flag movement has now attracted massive support from all segments of Zimbabwean society, who've engaged in protests, strikes, civil disobedience. The government has tried to repress this movement and has failed. I encourage you to watch this space in the lead up to the 2018 elections. In Guatemala, a country that's endured over 3 decades of civil war, after local and UN investigators unearthed a massive corruption scandal involving highest officials in the government, Guatemalans from all walks of life found unity and solidarity through collective action. They engaged in 20 days of concerted protests outside the National Palace, a nationwide strike. This pressure ultimately forced the president and his entourage to resign and face justice, all without violence. Late last year, fighters from the designated terrorist organization Al-Shabaab boarded this bus in northern Kenya, close to the Somali border. The passengers on the bus were women, Christian Muslim women. The Al-Shabaab fighters asked that the Muslim women get up and separate themselves from the Christians. Typically, this was a precursor to mass slaughter. What was the reaction of the women? The Muslim women refused to be separated from the Christian women. They said, "You will kill us all, or you will leave us all alone." They provided headscarves to the Christian women and hid them in the bus. And what happened? The fighters left. None of the people on the bus were killed. It also goes to show you the power and fierceness of women when they organize. In this country, perhaps the most consequential movement of my lifetime, the Black Lives Matter movement, has forced a national conversation about race and justice, and has brilliantly shown the intersections of different systems of oppression. A truly remarkable movement. So these were just a few examples, but why should researchers, policymakers, practitioners really care about movements? Why do movements matter? Turns out, some of you may be familiar with this research, turns out that nonviolent movements are actually quite effective at challenging injustices and in building more inclusive societies. A few years ago, when I was in the State Department, incidentally deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan, the peak period of Taliban fighting, when I was doing research for this book, Erica Chenoweth, who's a professor at the University of Denver, she and I collected data on about 330 violent and nonviolent campaigns. These were campaigns challenging incumbent regimes in foreign military occupations. They needed to have at least 1,000 observed participants to be included in the data set. We asked the fundamental question, against these formidable opponents, which form of resistance, violent or nonviolent, has been most effective? The result for many came as a surprise. The nonviolent movements succeeded twice as often as the violent ones, 53% of the time compared to 26% for the violent campaigns. We found that the most significant variable contributing to the outcome of campaigns was participation. The average nonviolent campaign attracted 11 times the level of participants as the average violent campaign. We found, importantly, that not only was nonviolent resistance more effective than violence, but that the longer-term societal consequences of nonviolent resistance were profound. Not only did nonviolent campaigns usher in to a significant degree more than violent campaigns democracy and democratic consolidation, they were also far more likely to bring about societies that stayed peaceful and did not fall back into civil war. That study culminated in a book, Why Civil Resistance Works, and it came out right as the Arab Spring was starting. So you can imagine folks in the US government, notably, who are these youth activists? What are these movements? What are these diffuse networks? How are they working? How are they toppling dictators? So it was an interesting time for me to be in the US government. Very interesting time to be in the US government. I was in the State Department when the Syrian revolution broke out in early 2011 and deployed to Turkey in 2012 in an attempt to support the nonviolent activists and opposition, providing training, cell phones, cameras, equipment, and the like. There were many factors that were militating against the success of nonviolent resistance in Syria. But still, I would honestly say that those of us in the policy and practitioner community were simply not good enough. We were not well positioned to provide coordinated, focused, flexible, timely assistance to those fluid, decentralized networks and actors that were driving the nonviolent part of the revolution. And I can tell you that the Syria experience has been the negative motivator for me to better understand what it takes to help these actors more effectively. Syria may have been a worst-case scenario, but given the resurgence of authoritarianism that's happening around the world, not only in Russia, in many parts of the world, and the closing of civic space that's well documented, we need, as an international community, to figure out how to more effectively support these nonviolent actors. And this is a particular area where the academic, policy, and activist communities need to be better synced. At the end of the day, we need to have an evidence base for which forms of assistance, under which conditions, actually can help activists and movements and not undermine their local legitimacy, put them in greater risk create a marketplace for activism, which is a worst-case scenario. So these communities really need to come together. And let's be honest, supporting diffuse, decentralized, leaderful movements is very difficult. It's very difficult when activists are demanding change, challenging power structures. This is often uncomfortable for donors and policymakers. But we collectively need to figure out how to crack this nut. I would say from experience, and in bridging the gap, I'll note for you that Erica Chenoweth and I are currently writing a second book together on this question of external support for movements. How have external actors affected the trajectories and outcomes of nonviolent movements? But I will say from experience that we need to figure out what it means to have what I'll call a movement mindset. Diplomats need to figure out how to better engage a broader swath of civil society, the non-traditional actors outside of capitals. Those in the audience who are from the security and military communities need to figure out how we can provide hundreds of millions of dollars in security assistance without contributing to worse governance in countries and shutting the space for civil society and peaceful actors. Development actors need to figure out how to get flexible funding to the grassroots where it matters and invest more in training and capacity and movement building, strategic nonviolent action. Let me conclude by saying a famous person by the name of Martin Luther King once said that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. He's absolutely correct. But we all know that it takes organized citizen action to bend that arc. So let us continue to build synergies between the academic, policy, activist community in order to give these nonviolent change agents a fighting chance. Thank you very much.